I didn't hear any talk about environmental liability on the statements or land reclamation. I heard you mention the reclamation, but just wondering, do they not have anything like that recorded?
That's right.
And if not, why are they not treated like others in the energy sector?
Well, that is a very good question. I have no idea why they're not treated. Well, actually, that's not true. I have a very good idea why they're not treated that way. During the Bush administration, Dick Cheney, let's see, can I walk around with it? So I guess not. During the Bush administration, Dick Cheney engaged in some rather interesting exercises, and the oil and gas industry became exempt from every single, now I'm speaking for the US now, because I'm not sure what your rules are up here in Canada. I apologize, but in the US, they are exempt from every major environmental act now in our country. And to give you an example of the impact of this, we have what is called the CERCLA Act, which is the Superfund Act. And if they weren't exempt from this act, every single one of those pad sites that I showed you on that map could potentially qualify as a Superfund site because of the chemicals used in the fracture stimulation process. Somebody's going to have to clean that up at the end of the day, and it's not going to be the operators. There is no, to my knowledge, no place on the planet is there a complete reclamation plan in place for oil and gas pad sites. In fact, that was the reason that quote from the EU jumped out at me in their report. You remember that, where it said it looks like it's impossible to do. It's going to be impossible to do. Therefore, that land, I didn't get to that one point. I wanted to tell you about the land use. Dr. John Lee is a petroleum engineer at the University of Houston, and the industry themselves refer to Dr. Lee as a legendary petroleum engineer. That's the way they describe him. He was also brought in by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, to be the architect of the rule change for oil and gas. I entered into an email exchange with Dr. Lee a little over a year ago, and I'm going to quote him here. What he told me was, we consider shale plays to be statistical plays. He said, 20% of the wells will carry the project, the other 80% can easily be uneconomic. What we found, pulling production data in the Barnett, was that, you remember the visual I gave you of the blue and then the few red dots? What we found was it wasn't even 20% of the play making money in the Barnett. It turned out to be 6%. 94% of the wells were not making money. So you've got 94% of that carpet of wells. That land can't be used. You can't build on it. You can't do anything with it. It will never generate revenues in the form of royalties to people. It will never generate, I say never. It might have generated a little bit at the beginning, but it's not going to go on very long. The other thing that we found with shale plays, pulling actual production data, is that the average well life is not 30, 40, 50 years, it's 7 years. Most of these shale wells are played out 85% by year 5. And in the shale oil, because we're hearing a lot of hype from the industry about shale oil plays, that's why I wanted to put in this data on the Eagle Ford, because that's like the hottest thing going right now. In shale oil, the steep declines, they're even steeper the first year. The Society of Petroleum Engineers, in their report that they issued about a month ago, 6 weeks ago or so on the Eagle Ford, the decline rates for the Eagle Ford are in excess of 80%. Some of them are even in excess of 90% in the first year, the very first year. So I began speaking out about shale oil when they announced it. They first announced they were going into shale oil in April of 2010, and I gave my first presentation in Pittsburgh on it in November of 2010, and I referred to shale oil, because again, I'm a woman, as a shale gas makeover. Same girl, different shade of lipstick. Yeah. Next question, please.
I want to thank you very much for a great presentation.
Thank you.
I have two questions. One question is, most of us, not all of us, but many of us live in the Kennebecasis Valley, which is this valley that goes along the river in many different communities from Quispamsis to Norton. And the first question is, there's 17 wells that are drilled here on the floodplain of the valley, of the river, that are under 2 feet of water. twice a year, up to 2 feet of water twice a year. In your experience, have you ever come upon any other place where they build wells, natural unconventional gas wells, on floodplains of rivers that flood and cover them with up to 2 feet of water twice a year?
Right where I live. Yeah, we have a river, the Trinity River, which runs through Fort Worth, and it floods, and sometimes it floods very badly indeed. I mean, it went all the way up to the 3rd floor. My mother remembers this before my time, but it went all the way up to the 3rd floor of one of our major department stores in town. I mean, it can really flood. And so they came in after that major flood, and they built a levee system all along our rivers. Now, shale gas came to town, and in Texas, oil and gas is so endemic to the culture there that no one questioned anything in the beginning. And they just allowed the operators free rein. In fact, the operators have been very frank. They always say, oh yeah, we started in Texas because we knew nobody would stop us from doing anything. And they'll tell you that. I mean, they're very open and frank about it. But they went in and they have now dotted all along that river. We have hundreds of shale gas wells, like 100 feet, 200 feet from the river, wow, and 100 feet from the levee, from the levees. And then after they had allowed thousands of these wells all over the Barnett, but hundreds and hundreds of them along the river, the Army Corps of Engineers woke up and they came in, they said, we think we might need to look into this. And they issued a report last year and they said, this is a little bit problematic. These wells should not be near levee systems and in floodplains. Well, it was too late. We've got hundreds of them now. So if you want more information on that, you could probably Google Army Corps of Engineers in Texas and find that study.
We have that same situation here, and as you probably know, and Dr. Ingrafia mentioned, Schlumberger did a study which showed that 5% of the wells leaked the first year, and by the 15th year, something like 50% of them leak. We have tried by asking all the ministers to be the premier and so forth, if they would at least, they don't monitor the wells at all, if they would at least monitor the river water that people swim in, take crops in, and it may be that our wells are connected to, if they would monitor the river water underneath the 17 wells downstream, so that we would understand and know if any frac chemicals were getting into the water.
Right.
There has been no response, no responsibility, and the Department of Environment, it would have been a big, expensive thing. Have you had any success in getting them to monitor such wells?
Not in Texas yet, but in Pennsylvania, the New York Times did that article on them dumping pollution, fracking water and so forth in the rivers, and they weren't testing for it, and they were exposed, and now they've cleaned that up pretty significantly in Pennsylvania, is my understanding. So that's the only example I know of where they've actually had a success.
How did they get them to test it?
The DEP, just because they had been embarrassed by the New York Times. It was quite an extensive investigative article. Ian Urbina did it, and it came out in February of 2011. And it was the first of his Drilling Down series articles. You can pull it up online. And apparently it did work. They did go in, they hired many more inspectors, and they started requiring industry to clean up. It's been a big embarrassment for the state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any regions, areas that have forgone the royalties that coming off of the shale gas wells for the first couple of years of production?
You mean
that's what's being recommended to our government, that we say we don't want the royalties for the first couple of years, or so. I'm not sure exactly what the number is. Is it 3 years? Yeah, for 3 years that no royalties come off of to the government into our public pockets.
Well, now that gets into leasing questions, and I don't know all the ins and outs of because I understand it's not like in the U.S. where we own our mineral rights. Your government owns the mineral rights. Is that correct? Yes. And so they're the ones who are going to be entering into the lease. And leases, I mean, you and I could have totally different leases and be paid totally different things depending on the deal we cut with the companies. So I don't know what those, and someone here may be able to answer that question better than I.
Well, as a financial analyst, do you think that's a wise thing to do?
Well, I don't know, because I don't know what they're getting at. I mean, are they asking that all the expenses be paid? That's kind of typical before royalties are paid out.
I'm not sure.
That's typical. And that may be what they're doing, and they may be saying because the price of gas is so low, I don't know.
I
But
think
here's
it's
the deal.
well, I think it's more just to encourage them to come here, I would think. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else knows the answer to that better, but.
Oh, you're saying your government has offered this.
Well, that's what's being recommended, that they offer a 3-year
Wow.
deferring on royalties.
We have a 10% royalty rate, which is calculated after expenses at the wellhead. And the government of New Brunswick has worked behind closed doors with industry to come up with this proposed set of regulations. One of the proposals is a 3-year royalty holiday.
First 3 years.
Those boys from Texas.
Excuse me, my second question is this, because I was actually told today that some of our government members of the legislature have read your information and they don't believe it.
Oh, well,
So
I heard that.
just-
No, wait, I'd like to say something. I heard that I've been attacked personally by the health minister. Is that right?
I'm not sure.
I think
I
it was.
wasn't aware
And
of
he
this
was, he,
today.
instead of attacking the data, he
Yeah.
attacked me. Now, I take that as a wonderful compliment. I really do. I've been doing this long enough. I really do. That means you're getting to them. Because when they can't attack the data, they always attack the person, ad hominem attacks. And so I think we should all applaud ourselves, because I really do.
So that leads me to my question, which is, and I'm sure, and I believe in miracles, so it will take a miracle for something like this to happen, but would you be willing to have a public debate
Sure.
on the economic?
Sure, I'd love it.
in our
I
province?
love to go toe-to-toe with industry, and I like it even better if an elected official is thrown in there.
Well, that would be nice if someone.
I'm also, I've said this, other people have asked me, I'm also, if they will agree to meet with me, I'm also quite happy to do that. I do a lot of that kind of work in Washington, Albany, I've done it all sorts of places. And I'm quite happy to meet with elected officials, but I particularly like it in a public venue. So, yeah, that would be great. Going back to your royalty thing though, 10% is kind of low. Yeah. No, we get paid in the Barnett about 25. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, 10% is pretty low. And, well, anyway, yeah. I think, well, let's just say I think I could cut a better deal. Also, back home where I live, people are grousing like crazy. They're like, they drilled these wells and we've never gotten a single check. Well, that's right, because you were part of the 80% or the 94% that didn't make money. So now you got the environmental pollution, you've got your kids, you know, I'm having people come up to me all the time now. My children have been to the emergency room. I'm not just telling you this, I mean, this is the honest to God truth. They come up to me all the time now and say, my grandchildren, my children, we've been to the emergency room 3 times in the last 4 months because of asthma attacks. I mean, our air quality is just appalling now. We essentially doubled our air pollution in the Dallas-Fort Worth region in 6 years through gas drilling. And all the operators, the major operators, they're gone now. They've already sold off all their assets in the Barnett or joint ventured them out. They're gone. And they were supposed to be there for 30 and 40 years, decades and decades to come. So, for what it's worth.
And I don't know about Mr. Romney, but I know President Obama fully supports this frack sharing, and he thinks that is the sort of the salvation of the U.S. energy program. So, what is the case? Is he not properly informed and, you know, acts accordingly, or what is the case? I don't know. I don't understand this.
President Obama, you can't, okay, I'm just going to be frank here. You can't piss off the oil and gas business and expect to be elected president in the United States of America. So, you have to walk a very fine line. And to my mind, I've heard him say some things like this 100 years of gas available, which remind me to explain that, by the way, because that's another obfuscation that you hear a lot about, and I was very disappointed to hear President Obama use it. But nevertheless, to my mind, he has come out and it has sounded like he's pro shale gas, but he's also doing things like the Environmental Protection Agency is going after the water contamination in Pavilion, Wyoming. And he's doing other things behind the scenes. They're bringing in air quality rules, the EPA is, that'll be nationwide. So while he's saying one thing, he's doing some other things. And I think you're just seeing, platform rhetoric for a political campaign.
It seems bittersweet that it's an economic and environmental disaster, but it will probably continue, and a lot of damage has already been done, so it leaves me feeling good and bad at the same time. But a couple times through your presentation, you referred to shale gas as a bridge fuel. I wonder if you could say something very briefly
Oh, yeah.
about what you mean by a bridge fuel.
I'm sorry. Okay, there's a lot of talk about that. What the industry in the beginning started out and said, look, we all know we need to move. I mean, they said this in the U.S. anyway. They said, we all know we need to move to renewables, right? To solar, geothermal, and wind power. But you can't do that overnight. The technology's not there. So you've got to have some sort of hydrocarbon use in the meantime. And look, here we are. We've got this great shale gas resource. It's cheap, it's abundant, and you really ought to use that as the bridge fuel as you transition your economy, our economy, to renewables. Now this thing, they've gotten so heady and giddy with their rhetoric that now they're saying we don't even need renewables anymore because now we have not 100 years of gas available, we have 200 years now. It's almost like they're in this drunken reverie, So that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, that 100-year supply of gas. Not very many people know this, and the industry relies on that. When they claim 100 years of gas, what they're talking about is what they call resource numbers. And resource numbers, defined by the Society of Petroleum Engineers, are essentially all the gas that's available in a play down there. Okay, so it's all the gas available, but the technology either doesn't exist to extract it, or the business environment isn't friendly to extract it, or perhaps even the pockets of gas are too small to ever be commercially viable to extract. Are you following me here? They're just counting how much gas is down there. Well, they know how much gas is down there, but if you have a little bitty pocket, you're not going to bother to go after it. But those are the numbers that industry always uses, and in Texas we kind of don't pay attention to this anymore because we know that this is what they do. But everybody else is listening to this, and President Obama gets up and talks about it in his State of the Union address, which was really most unfortunate, and claims 100 years worth of gas. Well, that's the resource number. The reserve figures, just to give you an example, for instance, the resource number for the Marcellus is something like 21 years, but the actual reserve figure, what they can actually pull out of the ground now, according to the definition by the Society of Petroleum Engineers, is 6 years worth of gas for the Marcellus. That's a very big difference. So they're going to go in and put pad sites in the density that I showed you in the Barnett all over the Marcellus for 6 years worth of gas. That's all that's there that they can get out that's commercially viable to extract at this moment in time. So it's a pity, but people need to understand the difference between resource and reserve numbers. And if the industry comes to you, that's why I like to do public debates with them, because they'll start throwing out these numbers, and then you can say, I'm sorry, but you're referring to resource numbers and not reserve figures. But most people don't know to say that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you just said the industry leaders consider it inevitable that we must transition from cheap crude.
No, that was their line.
That was their line.
Yeah, because we were talking, I mean, we all know that we have to transition away from hydrocarbons at some point, right? Everybody knows that. We have to go to renewable energy at some point. And so they crafted a public relations message that said, let us be your transition, your bridge fuel to renewables. And it sounded good. We're the cleanest burning hydrocarbon. Well, they are the cleanest burning hydrocarbon. Burning part. They are not the cleanest hydrocarbon. You've had Dr. Tony Ingraffia here. Dr. Ingraffia worked on a study, as you probably well know, with Dr. Howarth at Cornell. They extrapolated on paper, theoretically, how much they thought the fugitive emissions were from if you took the whole life cycle of gas, from drilling it to producing it, etc. Is it still the cleanest burning hydrocarbon? It turned out no, it's dirtier than coal, according to their numbers. Well, that study that I mentioned up here from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the University of Colorado Boulder, that was a 3-year study done on a natural gas field north of Denver. And they actually, it was an in-field study, and they corroborated Drs. Howarth and Ingraffia's numbers. Not only did they corroborate them, it turned out that the Cornell numbers were a little bit low. So we know now, if you take the full life cycle emissions of natural gas, it's not the cleanest burning hydrocarbon. I mean, it's not the cleanest hydrocarbon. It is the cleanest burning hydrocarbon. But it's actually dirtier than coal if you take the whole life cycle emissions, which